Good day everyone, RC GrabBag here, welcome back to the channel. In my last video I began construction of a 2-track wood trestle, and in this video I'm going to finish the bridge and install it in a layout in its planned location. Most of the bridge is constructed at this point, but there are still a few items that need to be done. The first thing I'm going to work on is installing the guard timbers. On the real bridge, these are pieces of lumber attached near the edge of the ties and run parallel to the rails. Since I use Micro-Engineering Bridge Flex Track, it comes complete with these plastic guard timbers. So here I'm just sanding them a little to rough up the surface for gluing and then cutting them from the sprues. Now I'm using a scrap piece of strip wood to provide some alignment while I put down a bead of glue. And I'm using contact cement here, so I have the scrap strip clamped in place while the glue sets up. Then I just press the guard timbers in place, remove the scrap wood, and there we go. Once the guard timbers were in place, I started working on the fire barrel platforms. On the real bridge, these platforms were placed at regular intervals to provide a spot to store barrels full of water just in case of a fire. The pieces for these miniature versions are also provided with the Micro-Engineering Bridge Track along with scale water barrels. Now I'm gluing the pieces together and using magnets to hold everything in place. And once the assembly is ready, it's a simple matter of sliding the platform mounts between the ties and under the rails. Now I'm putting the rest of the platforms in place, and I've left the backs off the platforms to make them a little easier to handle for now. And now I'll glue on the back railings. With the platforms in place, I need to do a little additional paint blending on the upper deck. This includes putting down this brown base coat, followed by some weathering to match the rest of the track. Now I need to give the trestle some firm footing for the bents to rest on, and there's a number of ways to go here, like simulated concrete footers and the like. But in my travels to the local hobby shop, I came across these molded stone walls from a brand called Pegasus, which caught my eye. They have some pretty nice stone detail, and they even have this taper built into the cross section, which I thought would fit nicely into the idea that I had. But they were going to need some work. They're not the right length for all of the bents, so I'll have to cut some shorter and make some others longer by blending the pieces together. And I want to paint them more realistically as well. Each wall is comprised of 2 pieces that I simply cut apart. And to those, I have some wood spacers glued to them, and then I'm just gluing to a larger piece of wood to make an assembly that is the proper size for a footer. The footer assembly is comprised of cut sections of the wall glued around the wood base, so I need to blend them together, and here I'm starting to do that by filling in with some hobby putty. As you can see, some gaps are smaller than others, so I have some putty with a more precise applicator tip for smaller gaps. Once the putty firmed up, I just took a Dremel with a cutting wheel and blended the joints further by cutting in some mortar lines. This works well for the horizontal mortar lines, but for the vertical ones, I just press the tip of a small screwdriver into the putty before it hardens. Finally, I did some sanding to blend even further. At this point, I'm ready to paint. I'm going to try to mimic the look of real stone walls like you see here. As you can see, there are various random shades of gray and brown throughout, so I want a similar look to the footers I'm making. And here I have some acrylic colors that I'll be using for the effect. After giving the walls a medium gray base coat of paint, I'm going to start adding color by dry brushing on some of the darker shades. It's also good to apply some color to individual stones to create more of the randomness effect. I think that looks pretty good. Could probably go a little darker in some areas, so I'll take care of that. Now I want the mortar lines to stand out a little more, so I'm mixing up some thin warm white acrylic paint. It's about a 50-50 mix of paint and water, and now I'm just applying it liberally to the stonework. Then I just soak up some of the excess white paint by blotting with a wadded up paper towel. Once the paint dries, the colors become more subdued, so from here I could repeat steps if I want or play around with some different colors, but I think this looks pretty good as is. Now, we're going to take a little break and look at a new building structure for the layout. This is the Brownsville Depot from Fine Scale Miniatures. This kit was released in 2012 as part of the Jewel collection from FSM. The kit is primarily wood construction and comes loaded with detail parts and detailed instructions for assembly and weathering tips as well. This particular example, like many other structures ready for the layout, was built by my good friend Karl, and he does amazing work. Hope you enjoyed this look at the Brownsville Depot from Fine Scale Miniatures. Now let's get back to the trestle build. With all the footers cut, blended, and painted, I'm going to fill in some of the space within the walls of each footer with plain old sand. This is because I plan to use ballast as the material for the bents to rest in, so the sand just acts as a filler. After brushing excess sand off the wood base, I'm using a thin mixture of white glue to fix the sand in place just as you would if you were ballasting track. The mix is roughly equal parts white glue and water with a drop of dish soap added as a wetting agent. I also have some wax paper between the footers and my work surface because some of the glue is going to leak out. Once the glue is dry, it's now a relatively simple matter of aligning the footers to the bents and gluing them in place. I'm using thin CA as the adhesive, allowing it to wick between the bottom of the bent and the footer base. I'm not too concerned with the appearance at the glue joint because this will be covered up by ballast. For the shorter bents, I'm using thicker CA to allow for slightly different handling. Finally, a little touch-up paint to some areas. Now it's time to apply the ballast to the footers, and this seemed like a good idea. I put the ballast in the squeeze bottle with a long wide spout to help me get the ballast into some of the tighter areas. I think with some better planning I could have avoided some of the trouble, but I really was kind of making this up as I went along, which is okay sometimes. So with my squeeze bottle dispenser, I'm putting ballast around the base of the bents, mainly concerned with getting enough in there and not worrying so much about neatness for now. Now I'm just taking a brush and leveling out the mess. And finally a few taps on the bridge itself to settle the ballast a little more. And with the ballast in place, I'm using a big glass dropper to saturate the ballast with the thinned white glue mix, just like with the sand. The dropper helps me get into the tighter spaces. So with the footers in place and the mess cleaned up, you have a better idea of what I was going for, and I think it looks pretty good. The bents are essentially sitting in stone boxes of ballast, and I think it really adds to the overall character and presence of the structure. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Now, as I mentioned in my last video, one side of this bridge will be shared by both standard gauge and narrow gauge traffic. For this, I need to have turnouts at either end of the bridge that can accommodate both standard and narrow gauge traffic. Sort of. The narrow gauge simply needs an entrance to the bridge on one end and an exit on the other. For that, I'm making a quasi dual gauge turnout. I say quasi because it will have just enough rail to accommodate the entrance and exit of the narrow gauge traffic, while allowing the standard gauge traffic to go straight on through. So here you can see I only need one point on each of the turnouts to accomplish the goal. And with the turnouts completed, the bridge is now ready to be installed on the layout. Up in the layout room, I begin the bridge installation by cutting out a section of track in the designated location, large enough to accommodate the bridge. From that point on, it's just a matter of fiddling with the finer measurements until it's a perfect fit. I even did some work to the nearby Diablo Canyon Bridge, which was originally installed with a slight incline. I wanted the trestle to be installed level, so the canyon bridge just didn't look right with the incline. So I leveled it out and changed the approach tracks to accommodate. The bridge installation is now mostly complete. Eventually, there will be scenery under the dangling bents and footers, but let's have a look anyway at the overall appearance at this stage. Here's a look at the dual gauge turnouts at each end. I think this view of the two bridges side by side leading up to the large curved trestle is pretty cool. And now it's time for the first bridge crossing. And the honors of first crossing go to this Intermountain Cab Forward number 4290. It's pulling a string of refrigerated Pacific Fruit Express reefers with a fresh load of produce. Well, that's it for the trestle build. Hope you enjoyed it. Now it's time for that segment of unrelated content that I'm officially now calling RC's GrabBag. And for this installment of RC's GrabBag, we'll be looking at some vintage model rocketry with some unique payload devices that added a whole new level of excitement to the hobby. So if you're interested, stick around. Otherwise, see you next time. Model rocketry as a hobby has been around for decades. One brand that stands out as probably the oldest and most well known is Estes. Estes made many rocketry items, but to me the most interesting were the rockets with photographic payloads. Each one of the rockets pictured here carried a camera payload of some sort, and that gave the hobbyist a glimpse into what it would be like to be up there in the sky with the rocket. So let's take a look at each one of these rockets in detail, starting with the oldest, introduced in 1966, called the Cineroc. The Cineroc was the first of its kind, a camera payload capable of shooting a single picture per flight on a special round piece of film specifically designed to fit inside the camera. The resulting circular image was captured when the rocket nosed over in flight, with the tip of the camera pointing towards the ground and the rocket engine's ejection charge fired. The ejection charge popped the camera off of the rocket, releasing the camera's shutter to snap the picture, while at the same time releasing the rocket's parachute to slow the vehicle's descent. This view is looking at the picture end of the Cineroc. The clear plastic cover was where the lens looked out while snapping the photo. This is what an unassembled Cineroc looked like. The Cineroc became available in 1966 and was in production for about 10 years. In the packaging were the Cineroc parts, a light tight package containing the film compartment preloaded with film, instructions and other assorted bits. The film itself was sent back to Estes for processing due to its unique format. Estes also made rocket kits specifically designed for carrying the Cineroc. The earliest was the two-stage Astron Delta, followed by the Cineroc carrier, both pictured here. When the Cineroc went out of production in the mid-1970s, it wasn't until later in the decade that you could buy a photo-snapping rocket from Estes. And this was it. Called the Astrocam, it debuted in 1979 and continued the photographic mission of the Cineroc, but with several key improvements. Firstly, the Astrocam came bundled with both the camera and the launch vehicle. Secondly, and perhaps most importantly, the Astrocam used commonly available, for the time, 110 cartridge film that could be purchased and processed just about anywhere. It made the camera much easier to load than the Cineroc and provided full-color photos as opposed to the Cineroc's black and white. Like the Cineroc, the Astrocam took one photo per flight, but with the 110 cartridge film you could take many photos across many flights. Probably the coolest of the camera payloads was the Estes Cineroc. The Cineroc was produced from 1970 to 1975. It was an actual movie camera that took full motion color movies from the rocket while in flight. The Cineroc was a marvel in simplicity. It only weighed about 2 ounces and utilized a custom Super 8 film cartridge containing about 10 feet of film, which was good for about 20 seconds of footage. This is the film cartridge pictured here, and each cartridge came in a light-proof package that also included batteries for driving the camera. The film took up most of the space in the camera while the batteries were loaded on top. The lens looked out the side of the rocket, and a small mirror on the outside of the camera in a streamlined shroud angled the view back towards the ground. The following is footage from a film produced by Estes, highlighting the features of the Cineroc, and it included several segments of flight footage. I have this entire film on my channel if you want to see the whole thing. I'll provide a link below. Inside the Cineroc packaging, besides the camera, there were assorted items like the instruction manual, a reward sticker that you could attach to your Cineroc in case it floated away and someone else found it, and a somewhat crude battery tester. Estes also made a 2-stage rocket kit specifically for the Cineroc called the Astron Omega. When the Omega was fully finished and paired up with the Cineroc like you see here, I have to admit it was a pretty handsome package. Well, that's all I have for this video. Hope you enjoyed the layout update and this look at some vintage rocketry. If you like what you see, please smash that like button and be sure to subscribe. See you next time!